In the underworld of Chicago, there is one rule that every civilian knows: never touch a Calloway. Leora Mercer broke that rule in front of 50 witnesses. She didn't do it to seduce him. She did it to save him. But in the shark tank of high-end dining, no good deed goes unpunished. Within seconds, she was thrown out into the cold, fired without a paycheck. But the manager, who screamed at her to leave, didn't realize one thing: the man Leora touched wasn't just drunk. He was dying. And Leora was the only one who knew why. This is the story of how a $20 tip turned into a war. The scent of Vittorio's was always the same expensive truffle oil, seared Wagyu, and fear. Leora Mercer adjusted the waist apron that was slightly too big for her frame, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. It was Friday night in downtown Chicago, and the restaurant was a war zone of clinking silverware and murmuring millionaires. Table 4 needs a refill on the 82 Bordeaux, and if you spill a drop, I'll deduct the bottle from your organs, Giselle, the floor manager, hissed as she breezed past. Giselle was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice and dressed in Prada. She hated Leora. It wasn't for any specific reason other than the fact that Leora was poor tired and currently pulling double shifts to pay for her mother's dialysis. Poverty had a smell, and Giselle found it offensive to her delicate nose. "Yes, Miss Grant," Leora murmured, keeping her head down. She grabbed the heavy crystal decanter, moving through the dimly lit dining room. Vittorio's wasn't just a restaurant. It was neutral ground. It was owned by the Calloway family. If you lived in this city, you knew the name. You didn't speak it loudly, and you certainly didn't look them in the eye if they walked in. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was a physical change, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado. The heavy oak double doors swung open. Conversation died. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Walking in was a phalanx of men in dark suits, moving with the synchronized lethality of a wolf pack. In the center was Salvatore Calloway, the Don. He was an older man, distinguished but terrifying. But tonight, all eyes were on the man walking slightly behind him. Dante Calloway. He was the heir, the Prince of Chicago. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Leora's entire life earnings. His hair was dark, swept back, and his jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. But Leora, trained by years of watching her sick mother, noticed something else. He was swaying. It was subtle. A slight listing to the left, a tremble in his right hand as he adjusted his cuff. His skin, usually a healthy olive tone, looked waxy and grey under the ambient chandeliers. "He's hurt," Leora thought, her grip tightening on the wine decanter. The entourage moved toward the VIP booth in the back, the one elevated on a dais, separated by a red velvet rope. This was the throne room. "Leora," Giselle snapped, appearing at her elbow like a wraith. "Do not stare. It's gauche. Go to the kitchen and get the antipasto platter for the Calloway table. Now. And send breathless adoration looks somewhere else." Leora didn't argue. She rushed to the kitchen, her heart hammering. The kitchen was chaos, but she grabbed the massive slate platter of cured meats and cheeses. It was heavy. As she pushed back out through the swinging doors, she saw the scene unfolding near the VIP section. Dante Calloway had stopped. He was gripping the back of a mahogany chair, his knuckles white. His breathing was ragged audible, even over the low jazz music playing. His father, Salvatore, was already seated laughing at something a bodyguard said, oblivious to his son's distress. Leora moved closer. intending to set the platter down on the side stand. As she passed Dante, he lurched. It wasn't a stumble. It was a collapse. His knees gave out. Time seemed to slow down. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct and the nursing degree she had abandoned halfway through due to lack of funds, Leora dropped the expensive antipasto platter. Crash. Ceramic shattered. Prosciutto and expensive Gouda flew across the pristine marble floor. But Leora didn't care. She lunged forward, catching Dante Calloway just before his head hit the corner of the table. Her arm hooked under his armpit, her other hand pressing flat against his chest to steady him. He was incredibly heavy, a dead weight of solid muscle. She felt the heat radiating off him through his suit jacket he was burning up. "I've got you," she whispered, straining under his weight. Dante's head lolled back, his eyes half open. They were the color of storm clouds, glazed over with pain. He looked at her confusion warring with agony. "Help," he rasped the word, barely a ghost of a sound. "Get your hands off him." The shriek tore through the room. Giselle was sprinting across the dining floor, her face twisted in horror. Behind her, 2 of the Calloway bodyguards had drawn guns, though they kept them low. Leora froze, but she didn't let go. If she let go, Dante would fall. "He's collapsing," Leora said, her voice shaking but loud. "He needs a chair. Something is wrong with his, you clumsy, incompetent little stray." Giselle reached them, grabbing Leora by the shoulder and yanking her backward. The force of the pull tore Leora's grip away from Dante. Deprived of support, Dante Calloway crumbled. He hit the floor not with a bang, but with a sickening heavy thud, landing amidst the scattered cheese and broken ceramic. The dining room gasped as one. Salvatore Calloway was on his feet instantly. "Dante!" Giselle turned on Leora, her eyes bulging. "You touched him. You tripped him." "Look what you did." "I didn't trip him," Leora cried, stepping back, hands raised. "I caught him." "He passed out." "Liar!" Giselle screamed, playing to the audience, playing to the terrifying Don standing 3 feet away. She had to shift the blame. If the Calloway heir was injured on her watch, she was dead. It had to be the waitress's fault. "I saw you. You were ogling him. You slipped on your own clumsiness, and you took him down with you. You assaulted a guest." Salvatore was kneeling beside his son, tapping Dante's face. Dante was groaning, clutching his side. Giselle turned to Leora, pointing a manicured finger at the exit. "You are fired. Get out. Get out of my restaurant before I have the police drag you out for assault." "But he's sick," Leora pleaded, looking at the man on the floor. She saw it then. A dark stain spreading on the side of Dante's charcoal jacket. It wasn't wine. "He's bleeding. Look at his side." "Get out!" Giselle shoved Leora toward the kitchen doors. "Don't you dare speak about him. You're finished in this town." Mercer finished. Leora looked at Dante one last time. His eyes met hers from the floor. He was conscious barely. He was looking at her with an intensity that terrified her. Humiliation burned her cheeks hotter than fire. Tears stung her eyes. She ripped off her apron, threw it onto a pile of dirty linen, and ran out the back door into the alleyway. The Chicago wind in November was cruel. It didn't just blow. It bit. Leora stood in the alley behind Vittorio's, shivering violently. She was wearing only her thin white uniform shirt and black slacks. Her coat was still in the employee locker, but she was too terrified to go back inside to get it. Giselle's voice was still ringing in her ears. "Fired. The word felt like a physical blow to the stomach. She had rent due in 3 days. Her mother's medication copay was $400. She had $17 in her bank account. She leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until she hit the wet pavement, burying her face in her knees. She sobbed a harsh, ragged sound that echoed in the empty alley. It wasn't fair. Nothing was ever fair. "Stupid," she whispered to herself. "Stupid hero complex. You should have just let him fall." But she knew she couldn't have. She had felt his pulse when her hand brushed his neck. It was thready, erratic. And that stain. Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the restaurant burst open. Leora scrambled up, wiping her eyes, expecting Giselle coming to scream at her. More, or maybe the police. She braced herself to run. But it wasn't Giselle. It was one of the bodyguards, a giant of a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. He looked frantic. He scanned the alley wild-eyed until he spotted Leora shivering by the dumpsters. "You," he barked. Leora flinched. "I'm leaving. I'm going. Please, I just need my coat." "Shut up," the man growled, rushing toward her. He didn't attack her. He grabbed her arm, but not aggressively, desperately. "You said he was bleeding." Leora blinked confusion, halting her panic. "What? Inside before that witch threw you out? You screamed that he was bleeding. How did you know?" I saw the stain," Leora stammered. "On his jacket, darker than the fabric. And he was guarding his right side. His skin was diaphoretic, sweaty, clammy. It looked like hypovolemic shock." The bodyguard's eyes widened. "You a doctor, nursing school dropout," she said. "Why, get in here now." "No way." Leora pulled back. "Giselle fired me. She said if I came back, she'd call the cops. I'm not getting involved with... The boss isn't asking." The bodyguard said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "Dante isn't waking up. The ambulance is 10 minutes out. We can't wait 10 minutes." He didn't wait for her permission. He pulled her back through the metal doors. The kitchen was silent. The chefs were pressed against the walls, looking terrified. The swinging doors to the dining room were propped open. Leora was dragged onto the dining floor. The scene was chaos. Tables were overturned. The patrons had been cleared out or were cowering in the corners. Dante Calloway was lying on 2 pushed-together tables. His shirt had been ripped open. There was blood everywhere. Giselle was standing there, wringing her hands, looking pale. When she saw Leora, her face twisted. "What is she doing here? I told you to leave security. Remove her." "Silence!" The roar came from Salvatore Calloway. The Don was standing over his son, his hands covered in blood. He looked up, and the fury in his eyes made Giselle snap her mouth shut with an audible click. Salvatore looked at the bodyguard. "Well, she spotted it, boss. She knew he was bleeding before he hit the ground." Salvatore turned his gaze to Leora. It was like being examined by a lion. "Fix him." I can't," Leora's voice trembled. "I'm a waitress. I haven't finished my degree. You need a surgeon." "The surgeon is in traffic," Salvatore shouted, losing his composure. "He has a gunshot wound. It reopened. He's bleeding out. Do something to stop it until the medic gets here, or I will burn this city to the ground." Leora looked at Dante. He was pale as a sheet now. His chest was barely moving. She looked at Giselle. The manager was trembling, terrified that her earlier dismissal of Leora might now cost her her life. Leora took a breath. She pushed her fear down into a small, tight box in her stomach. She stepped forward, her voice changing. It wasn't the waitress voice anymore. It was the voice of the woman who had kept her mother alive for 3 years. "I need vodka," Lyora commanded. "High proof, and clean towels. Linen, not terry cloth. Now." The bartender scrambled. Lyora approached Dante. She put her hands on the wound. It was a jagged tear just below his ribs. He must have been shot days ago, and stitched it up himself poorly. The fall had ripped the sutures. "Giselle," Lyora said, not looking up. "What?" the manager stuttered. "Come here." I can't stand blood." "I don't care," Lyora snapped. "Get over here and put pressure right here on this artery while I pack the wound. If you let go, he dies. If he dies, his father kills you. Do you understand?" Giselle let out a whimper, but she scurried forward, placing her trembling, manicured hands where Lyora pointed. For the next 6 minutes, Lyora worked. She poured the vodka to disinfect. She packed the wound tightly with the linen napkins to encourage clotting. She checked his airway. She monitored his pulse. "Stay with me," she whispered to Dante, brushing a lock of sweat-dampened hair off his forehead. "Don't you dare die on a dining table. It's cliché." Dante's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused, but they found her face. He blinked. "You," he breathed. "Yeah, the clumsy stray," Lyora murmured. "Save your breath." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The ambulance was here. Lyora stepped back, her hands covered in the blood of the most dangerous man in Chicago. She felt lightheaded. The paramedics burst in, taking over instantly. They loaded Dante onto a gurney. The chaos moved toward the exit. Salvatore Calloway stopped at the door. He turned back. He walked past Giselle, who was sobbing with relief, and stopped in front of Lyora. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, handing it to her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lyora Mercer." "Lyora Mercer," Salvatore repeated. He looked at Giselle. "You fired her." Giselle swallowed hard. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. I thought she had assaulted." "You are an idiot," Salvatore said calmly. "Get out of my sight. If I see you in this city again, you won't leave it walking." Giselle fled. She didn't even grab her purse. She ran out the back door the same way Lyora had moments ago. Salvatore turned back to Lyora. "You saved his life. The doctors will take it from here, but you bought him the time he needed." "I just did what anyone would do," Lyora said. "No." Salvatore shook his head. "Anyone else would have run. You stayed." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. It was black with gold embossing. A phone number. Nothing else. "Go home. Wash up. Tomorrow morning a car will pick you up at 9 a.m. "Pick me up for what?" Lyora asked. Salvatore's eyes were hard, but there was a glimmer of respect in them. "My son is going to need a private nurse while he recovers. I don't trust hospitals. I don't trust strangers. But he seems to trust you." "I'm not a nurse," Lyora insisted. "And I can't work for you. I know who you are." Salvatore leaned in close. "You just saved a Calloway Ms. Mercer. You are already involved. Besides," he looked around the empty restaurant, "it looks like you're currently unemployed, and I pay $5,000 a week." Lyora's jaw dropped. 5,000. That was her mother's treatment for 3 months. 9:00 a.m., Salvatore said. It wasn't a question. He turned and walked out into the Chicago night, leaving Lyora standing alone in the blood-stained dining room, holding the business card of the devil. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. She had been fired for touching the boss's son. Now she was owned by him. The car that arrived at 9 a.m. sharp was not a limousine. Limousines were for prom nights and show-offs. This was a matte black armored SUV, with tinted windows so dark they looked like pools of oil. Leora kissed her mother's forehead as she slept. The dialysis machine hummed its rhythmic mechanical lullaby in the corner of their cramped apartment. It was the sound of Leora's life, a countdown clock that required money to keep rewinding. "I got a private nursing gig, Ma," Leora whispered to the sleeping woman. "Rich client, eccentric. I might have to stay over a few nights." It wasn't a lie, not entirely, but as she stepped out onto the crumbling sidewalk of her neighborhood and saw the driver standing like a statue beside the open door of the SUV, she felt like she was stepping onto a gallows. The drive was 40 minutes of silence. The driver, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump, didn't speak. Leora watched the city transform through the bulletproof glass. The cracked pavement and bodegas of the south side gave way to the manicured lawns and iron gates of the north shore. They turned onto a private road that wound through a dense forest of oak trees, their branches stripped bare by the November wind, looking like skeletal fingers reaching for the car. Then the Callaway estate appeared. It was a monstrosity of grey stone and Gothic architecture looming against the grey sky. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress built to keep people out and keep secrets in. There were cameras on the perimeter fence. Men with earpieces patrolled the grounds with Dobermans on thick chain leashes. The car stopped under a stone portico. "Go inside. 3rd floor. East wing," the driver grunted. It was the first thing he had said. Leora grabbed her canvas tote bag, which contained her scrub top and a change of clothes. She stepped out the gravel, crunching loudly under her sneakers. The front door, a massive slab of dark oak, reinforced with iron, opened before she could knock. An older woman stood there. She wore a severe black dress, and her grey hair was pulled back so tightly it pulled the skin of her face taut. This was Mrs. Gable. "You are the girl," Mrs. Gable said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was dry as parchment. "I'm Leora. Mr. Callaway hired me to. I know why you are here. Mr. Salvatore is not present. He is handling business. You are to go to Mr. Dante immediately." Mrs. Gable turned and walked away, expecting Leora to follow. The interior of the house was suffocating. It smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and something metallic like gun oil. The ceilings were 20 feet high, casting long, menacing shadows. Every step Leora took echoed on the marble floors, making her feel small like an intruder in a museum of predators. They climbed a spiraling staircase. The air grew warmer as they ascended, stiflingly so. "The doctor came last night," Mrs. Gable said, not looking back. "He stitched the wound and set up a transfusion. But Mr. Dante is difficult. He refuses to go to a hospital. He refuses the staff. He broke the last nurse's nose 2 years ago." Leora stumbled slightly on a step. "He did what?" Mrs. Gable stopped and turned her eyes cold. "He was in pain. A wounded animal bites, Miss Mercer. Do not take it personally. But do not let him bleed out. Salvatore was very clear. If his son dies, you are responsible." Responsible. In the Callaway dialect, that word meant dead. They reached the 3rd floor. At the end of a long hallway, lined with portraits of unsmiling men, Mrs. Gable pointed to a double door. "Enter. I will have food brought up. Do not leave the room unless the house is burning down." Mrs. Gable turned and walked away. her footsteps fading into the silence. Leora stood before the door. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the clinical detachment she learned in her first year of nursing school. He is just a patient, she told herself. Just a body with a broken part. She pushed the door open. The room was massive, draped in shadow. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the daylight. The only light came from a single lamp on a bedside table and the glowing monitors of medical equipment that looked out of place amidst the antique furniture. The air was hot, thick with the smell of fever sweat and sickness. Leora moved quietly across the Persian rug. In the center of the room lay a massive four-poster bed. Dante Calloway was lying there, tangled in silk sheets that were damp with sweat. He was shirtless, his torso wrapped in fresh white bandages that contrasted sharply with his tanned skin. Even in sleep, he looked dangerous. His brows were furrowed, his jaw clenched tight. Leora approached the bed slowly. She set her bag down and reached for the chart the doctor had left on the nightstand. Gunshot wound to the lower right abdomen. Liver laceration, grade 2. Blood loss significant. High risk of infection. She looked down at him. He was beautiful in a terrifying way. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, a scar running along his collarbone. Tattoos of ink-black vines and Latin script disappearing under the waistband of his low-slung sweatpants. She reached out to check the IV drip. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. His skin was burning. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Check vitals, change the dressing, stay alive." She reached for the thermometer on the tray. As she leaned over him to place it near his temple, the air in the room shifted. In a blur of motion too fast to track, a hand shot up. Leora gasped as strong fingers wrapped around her wrist, crushing the delicate bones. Dante's eyes flew open. They weren't glazed anymore. They were wide, wild, and dilated. He didn't see a nurse. He saw a threat. "Who sent you?" He snarled, his voice a ruined gravel sound. Before Leora could answer, he yanked her arm. Leora lost her balance and fell forward, landing hard on the edge of the mattress. Dante moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man who had lost 2 pints of blood. He twisted, pinning her upper body down with his forearm against her throat. "Speak!" he roared, baring his teeth. Leora stared up into the eyes of the man she had saved. There was no gratitude there, only violence. The pressure on her windpipe was absolute. Leora clawed at his arm, her fingernails scraping against his fever-hot skin. But it was like trying to move a steel beam. "Dante," she choked out. "I'm the waitress." He blinked. The fog in his grey eyes cleared for a fraction of a second, then clouded over again with pain and paranoia. He winced, a spasm of agony ripping through his side where the stitches were pulling, but he didn't let go. "Waitress," he rasped. "Vittorio's." "Yes," she wheezed. "You collapsed. Your father. He hired me." Dante stared at her, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was warring with the blood loss. Slowly, agonizingly, the recognition set in. He remembered the crash of the plate. He remembered the smell of her hair when she caught him vanilla and rain. He released her throat, shoving her away, as he collapsed back onto the pillows. He let out a groan that sounded like it was torn from the center of his chest. Leora scrambled back, coughing, rubbing her neck. She should run. She should run out that door past Mrs. Gable and keep running until she hit the state line. But she looked at the monitor. His heart rate was skyrocketing. 140 beats per minute. "You ripped it," she said, her voice hoarse. She pointed to his side. A fresh bloom of red was spreading across the white bandages. "Get us out," Dante muttered, closing his eyes, his face twisting. "I don't need a babysitter. Tell Salvatore to go to hell." "I can't," Leora said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. She stood up, smoothing her shirt. "He's paying me $5,000. Unless you have $5,000 on you to pay me to leave, I'm staying." Dante opened one eye. It was bloodshot. He looked at her with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "You're staying for the money. I have bills. You have a hole in your side. We both have problems." She walked to the sink in the corner of the room, washing her hands thoroughly with antibacterial soap. She could feel his eyes on her back, tracking her every movement like a predator watching prey. She snapped on a pair of latex gloves and returned to the bedside. "I need to change that dressing. You're bleeding through." "Don't touch me," he warned. "If I don't touch you, you get septic. If you get septic, you die. If you die, I don't get paid. So shut up and let me work." She didn't wait for his permission. She reached for the hem of the bandages. Dante flinched when her fingers grazed his skin, his abdominal muscles contracting hard. He was made of iron, every muscle defined and tense, but the heat radiating off him was alarming. He was deep in the throes of a fever. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, her voice softer now. She began to peel back the tape. The wound was angry and flamed red around the jagged black stitches. It was an ugly thing, a testament to violence. Dante didn't make a sound, but his hands gripped the silk sheets so hard his knuckles turned white. He stared at the ceiling, his breathing shallow and rapid. Leora worked with efficient, gentle movements. She cleaned the area with saline, her touch feather-light. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "What?" he gritted out through clenched teeth. "Distract yourself. Talk to me." "Why did you fall at the restaurant?" "I was drunk," he lied. "You were in hypovolemic shock," she corrected, applying the antibiotic ointment. "And you were septic. You waited 3 days to get this treated, didn't you?" Dante turned his head to look at her. The pain was making his vision swim, but her face was clear. She wasn't beautiful in the way the women he usually dated were plastic-polished, perfect. She was real. She had dark circles under her eyes, messy hair, and a determination in her jaw that intrigued him. 4 days, he corrected. "Why?" "Because," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "the person who shot me was supposed to be watching my back. I didn't know who else turned." Leora paused, her hands hovering over his skin. A chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature went down her spine. Trust no one. That was the rule here. "Well," Leora said, applying the fresh gauze pad and taping it down securely. "I'm just a waitress. I don't have a gun. And I want you alive so I can pay my rent. I'm probably the safest person in this house." Dante let out a short, dry laugh that turned into a cough. "Safest person," he mocked. "You have no idea where you are, Leora." It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded intimate, dangerous on his tongue. "I know I'm in the Calloway house," she said, pulling the sheet back up to his waist. "Now I need to sponge you down. Your fever is 103. If it hits 104, we're in seizure territory." "No," he said weakly. "I'm fine." "You are not fine. You are burning up." She went to the bathroom and returned with a basin of tepid water and a soft cloth. "Arms first," she instructed. Dante didn't fight her this time. He was losing the battle against exhaustion. As she ran the cool, damp cloth down his muscular arm over the intricate tattoos, he watched her. The sensation was maddening. He was used to pain. He was used to rough hands, to fights, to the cold touch of metal. He wasn't used to this gentleness. It felt foreign, almost invasive. "Why did you catch me?" he asked suddenly. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the water dripping into the basin. Leora stopped at his wrist. She looked at his scar-covered hand. "My mother is sick," she said quietly. "I've spent the last 3 years catching her when she falls. It's a reflex. I see someone hurting, I move. I don't think." "A reflex," Dante mused. His eyes were heavy-lidded. The fever was pulling him under. "That's a dangerous reflex to have around me." "Maybe," Leora said. She moved the cloth to his neck. He leaned into the touch involuntarily, a sigh escaping his lips. "Leora," he murmured. He was drifting now, the delirium setting back in. "I'm here." "Check the door," he whispered, his eyes sliding shut. "The door is locked, Dante." "Under the pillow," he mumbled, his words slurring. "Check. Under." He fell asleep. Leora stood there for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. The fierce, terrifying man looked almost like a boy, now stripped of his defenses by the fever. Curiosity, a dangerous thing, took over. She reached out and slid her hand slowly under his pillow. Her fingers brushed cold steel. She pulled it out partially. It was a handgun, sleek black with the safety off. He had been sleeping with a loaded weapon, 2 inches from his head. Even in his own home. Even surrounded by guards. Leora stared at the gun, then at the sleeping man. He wasn't just a prince in a castle. He was a prisoner of a war that never ended. She carefully slid the gun back under the pillow. She sat down in the armchair beside his bed, pulling her knees to her chest. The sun was setting outside, casting long, blood-red shadows across the room. Leora knew she wouldn't sleep tonight. She would watch the monitors. She would watch the door. She was the expensive band-aid, the hired help. But as she watched Dante Calloway sleep, she realized she was also the only thing standing between him and the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, Leora Mercer didn't feel afraid of the dark. She felt useful. But she didn't see the camera blinking in the corner of the ceiling. The red light, steady and unblinking, recording every touch, every word, transmitting it to a screen in the basement where Salvatore Calloway sat, swirling a glass of scotch, watching the waitress and his son with a calculating, unreadable expression. "Interesting," the Don whispered to the empty room. "Very interesting." The digital clock on the bedside table read 3:14 a.m. The Calloway mansion was a tomb. The silence was so heavy it felt pressurized, pressing against Leora's eardrums. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving a stillness that was somehow more unsettling than the storm. Leora hadn't slept. She was curled up in the wingback chair, a blanket draped over her legs, reading a dog-eared paperback she had found on the bookshelf, The Count of Monte Cristo. A story about revenge. Fitting. She glanced at the bed. Dante was sleeping fitfully. The fever had broken an hour ago, leaving him soaked in sweat but cooler to the touch. He had kicked the sheets off his chest, rising and falling in a rhythm that was finally blessedly steady. Leora set her book down and stood up to stretch. Her back popped. She needed water. She walked softly to the ensuite bathroom. The marble was cold under her sock-covered feet. She splashed water on her face, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror. She looked like a ghost. Pale skin, dark circles, hair a tangled mess. "What are you doing here, Leora?" she asked her reflection. "You're a nurse, not a mob wife. You should take the money and run." But she knew she wouldn't. Not yet. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the way Dante had looked at her earlier when the delirium faded for a moment. He looked lonely, a kind of bone-deep loneliness that she recognized in herself. She dried her face and walked back into the bedroom. She stopped. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. It was a primal instinct, something older than logic. The door to the hallway. Mrs. Gable had locked it from the outside. Leora had heard the distinct click of the deadbolt at 10 p.m. The handle was turning. It was a slow, agonizing rotation. Brass grinding against brass, muffled but audible in the dead silence. Leora froze. Maybe it's Mrs. Gable. Maybe the doctor. But they would knock. They wouldn't sneak. The lock clicked open. Someone had a key. Leora looked at Dante. He was deep asleep, sedated by the painkillers she had administered 4 hours ago. He wouldn't wake up in time. The door creaked open an inch. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across the Persian rug. Leora didn't think. She moved. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. She remembered what Dante had said in his fever dream. Under the pillow. She slid her hand under his head. Dante stirred, groaning low in his throat, but he didn't wake. Her fingers found the cold, heavy metal of the handgun. She pulled it out. It was heavier than she expected. She had never held a gun in her life. She gripped it with both hands, her palms sweating. The door swung open fully. A figure stepped into the room. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't Salvatore. The man was dressed in all black, wearing a ski mask. He held a pistol with a suppressor, a long cylindrical tube attached to the barrel. He moved silently, raising his weapon, aiming directly at the sleeping form of Dante Calloway. He didn't see Leora. She was crouched on the floor on the far side of the bed, hidden by the height of the mattress. The assassin took a step closer to the bed to ensure the kill. Leora stood up. "Hey!" she screamed. The sound tore through the silence like a grenade. The assassin spun around, startled. Leora squeezed the trigger. She didn't aim. She didn't brace herself. She just pulled. Bang! The recoil was massive. The gun bucked in her hands, flying upward, nearly hitting her in the face. The sound was deafening, amplified by the enclosed room. She missed. The bullet shattered the antique lamp on the bedside table, sending sparks and glass flying. But it was enough. Dante woke up. He didn't wake up groggy. He woke up violent. The assassin, disoriented by the noise and the sudden darkness as the lamp exploded, fired a shot wildly. It thwacked into the headboard, inches from Dante's ear. Dante roared, a sound of pure rage. Despite his wound, despite the blood loss, he launched himself out of the bed. He collided with the assassin, tackling him to the floor. The two men crashed into the heavy oak wardrobe. The assassin's gun skittered across the floor. "Leora, get down!" Dante screamed. He slammed the assassin against the wall, but his strength failed him. His knees buckled as the stitches in his side tore open again. The assassin, realizing his target was weak, drove a knee into Dante's stomach. Dante crumpled, gasping for air, clutching his bleeding side. The assassin drew a knife from his belt, a serrated combat blade. He raised it, preparing to plunge it into Dante's neck. Leora saw the knife. She saw Dante on his knees, defenseless. The gun was still in her hand. Her ears were ringing. Her vision was tunneling. She didn't scream this time. She stepped forward, leveled the gun at the center of the assassin's back, and steadied her shaking hands. Center mass. Just like in the movies. She fired. The bullet hit the assassin in the shoulder. He cried out the knife, clattering from his hand, as he spun around, falling backward over the ottoman. He tried to scramble up, clutching his bleeding shoulder eyes wild behind the mask. He looked at Leora, then at the door. He turned to run. "No, you don't," Dante growled. Dante, fueled by pure adrenaline, grabbed the heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar from the dresser and hurled it. It struck the assassin in the back of the legs. He went down hard. Before he could rise, the hallway was flooded with light. Men were shouting. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. Salvatore Calloway burst into the room, followed by 6 armed guards. "Dante!" Salvatore shouted, his gun drawn. The scene froze. The assassin was groaning on the floor. Dante was leaned against the wall, white as a sheet blood seeping through his bandages. And Leora stood in the center of the room, wearing oversized scrubs, her hair wild, holding a smoking gun with both hands. Salvatore looked at the assassin, then at his son, and finally at the waitress. "Secure the perimeter," Salvatore barked at his men. 2 guards grabbed the assassin, dragging him up roughly. Dante slid down the wall to a sitting position. He looked at Leora. His grey eyes were wide, filled with shock, and something else, awe. "You?" Dante breathed, pressing his hand to his side. Leora looked at the gun in her hand. The reality of what she had just done crashed into her. She dropped the weapon as if it had turned red hot. Her knees gave way. But she didn't hit the floor. Salvatore Calloway moved faster than an old man should, catching her by the arm. "Steady, Miss Mercer," the Don said. His voice was devoid of its usual menace. It was serious. "Breathe." Leora gasped, air rushing into her lungs. She looked at Dante. "He tried to kill you," she whispered. "Yeah," Dante said, a grim smile touching his lips as he looked at the blood on his hands. He tried. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Leora was moved to a chair in the corner, while the house doctor, a nervous, balding man named Dr. Aris, stitched Dante's wound right there in the bedroom. Dante refused to leave the room. He refused to let Leora leave the room. "She stays where I can see her," Dante had snarled when Salvatore suggested Leora go rest. Now the room was cleaned. The shattered lamp was gone. The assassin had been dragged to the basement. Leora didn't want to know what was happening down there. Dante was sitting up in bed. Fresh bandages applied an IV of fluids running into his arm. He looked exhausted, his skin grey, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room. Salvatore stood by the fireplace, his back to them, staring into the dead embers. "How did he get in?" Dante asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "We are finding out," Salvatore said, not turning around. "The perimeter alarm didn't trip," Dante said. "The dogs didn't bark. The hallway cameras were on a loop, and he had a key to my room." Leora hugged her knees to her chest. She was still shivering, the adrenaline crash leaving her cold. "It was an inside job," Dante said. It wasn't a question. Salvatore turned then. His face was a mask of stone. "Yes." "Who?" "Vincent." Dante flinched as if he'd been slapped. Vinny, my head of security. He's been with us for 10 years. He taught me how to shoot. Money changes people, Salvatore said simply. We found the transfer. $2 million in an offshore account in the Caymans, wired yesterday morning. He disabled the alarms and gave the key to the hitter. Where is Vincent now? Dante asked. He is in the trunk of a car on his way to the marsh, Salvatore said. He will not be a problem anymore. Leora felt bile rise in her throat. She covered her mouth, looking away. This was their reality. Betrayal, murder, disposal. It was a business transaction to them. And the assassin, Dante asked, a freelancer, hired by the Russos. They smelled blood in the water after you were shot last week. They wanted to finish the job. Salvatore walked over to the bed. He looked at Dante. Then he turned his gaze to Leora. He walked toward her. Leora stiffened, pressing herself back into the chair. Salvatore stopped in front of her. He looked down. You have never held a gun before tonight, have you? No, Leora whispered. You missed the first shot by 3 feet. You nearly took out my son's ear. I'm sorry. The second shot, however. Salvatore continued, his voice lowering. Shoulder. Incapacitating. It saved his life. He reached into his pocket. Leora flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a checkbook. He wrote something quickly, tore the page out, and held it out to her. $100,000, Salvatore said. Severance pay. Leora stared at the check. It was more money than she could imagine. Severance, she asked. You are done, Salvatore said. This life, it is not for civilians. Tonight was a warning. Next time they won't miss. Next time they will kill the witnesses too. You are a liability, Miss Mercer, and you are in danger. He placed the check on the small table beside her. The driver is waiting downstairs. He will take you home. Do not come back, for your own good. Salvatore turned to leave. Leora looked at the check. It was freedom. It was her mother's dialysis paid for 5 years. It was safety. She stood up, her legs shaky. She reached for the check. No. The word was quiet, but it stopped Salvatore at the door. Dante was sitting forward, wincing as he pulled against the IV line. She doesn't leave, Dante said. Dante, Salvatore warned, his voice rising. She is a waitress. She almost got killed tonight. You cannot keep her here like a pet. She's not a pet, Dante shouted, his voice cracking. She's the only one in this house who isn't on a payroll. Vinny was on the payroll. The guards are on the payroll. They can all be bought. Dante pointed a trembling finger at Leora. She didn't have to shoot. She could have hidden. She could have run. She stayed. She fought. Dante looked at Leora, his eyes pleading. Don't go. Leora stood frozen. She looked at the check, then at the door, then at Dante. He looked broken. The powerful, terrifying Mafia prince was gone. In his place was a man who had been betrayed by his brother-in-arms, who was bleeding and surrounded by sharks, asking the only person he trusted to stay. Dante, your father is right, Leora said softly. I almost died. I'm scared. I know, Dante said. I'm scared too. The admission hung in the air. A Calloway never admitted fear. I will double it, Dante said desperately. I'll pay for your mother's treatment. I'll move her to the best clinic in Switzerland. I'll put a detail on her 24/7. No one will touch her. But please, don't leave me here alone with them. He looked at his father with cold eyes. If she leaves, I walk, Dante threatened. I'll rip these stitches out, and I'll walk out that door, and you'll never see me again." Salvatore looked between them. He saw the desperation in his son's eyes. He saw the hesitation in the girl's posture. The Don sighed a heavy, tired sound. He looked at Leora. "The choice is yours, Miss Mercer. Take the money and live a long, boring life. Or stay, and I cannot promise you will see next Christmas." Leora looked at the check. $100,000. Then she looked at Dante. He was holding his side, his face pale, watching her like she was the only lifeline in a drowning ocean. She thought about her life before this. The grease stains, Giselle's screaming, the crushing weight of poverty, the invisibility. Here she wasn't invisible. Here she was terrified, yes. But she was alive. Leora picked up the check. Dante's face fell. He looked away, defeated. Leora ripped the check in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the room. She ripped it again and again until it was confetti. She let the pieces flutter to the floor. "I'm not a mercenary," Leora said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm your nurse. You're not healed yet." She walked back to the bed. She adjusted his pillow. She checked his IV. "Lie back down," she ordered. "You're spiking your heart rate." Dante looked at her. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. It reached his eyes, lighting them up. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. Salvatore watched them for a moment. He didn't smile, but he nodded once, a microscopic gesture of approval. He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Leora sat down in the chair beside the bed. "You're an idiot," Dante said softly, reaching out to take her hand. His grip was weak but warm. "I know," Leora said, squeezing his hand back. "Now shut up and go to sleep." But as she sat there holding the hand of the devil's son, Leora knew the truth. She hadn't stayed for the job. She hadn't even stayed for the safety. She stayed because, for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged, even if she belonged in the center of a target. 6 months later, Vittorio's reopened. The restaurant had been closed for renovations, which was the Callaway code word for a mob war. The Russo family had been dismantled piece by piece in a conflict that shook Chicago to its foundations. Tonight, the air didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled of victory. Leora stood in front of the full-length mirror in the penthouse of the Callaway estate. She wasn't wearing a white uniform or an oversized apron. She was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk slit high up the thigh. Around her neck sat a diamond choker that cost more than the building she used to live in. "You look dangerous," a voice growled from the doorway. Dante leaned against the frame. He looked different now. The gauntness of his injury was gone, replaced by the formidable bulk of a man at his peak. But the scar remained on his side, a jagged souvenir of the night she saved him. He walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in her neck. "Are you ready to go back there?" he asked softly. "To the scene of the crime?" Leora smirked, turning in his arms to fix his bow tie. "I'm not afraid of Vittorio's Dante. I own it now." It was true. As a wedding gift, though the wedding was still a secret, Salvatore had transferred the deed of the restaurant to her. They took the elevator down to the garage. This time, no one sat in the back with them. Dante drove. When they arrived at the restaurant, the paparazzi were swarming. The flashbulbs blinded them as the valet opened the door. Dante stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, his eyes scanning the crowd with that habitual predator's gaze. He reached a hand back for her. Leora took it. As they walked through the heavy oak doors, the room went silent, just like the first night. But this time, the silence wasn't for the Callaways. It was for her. The staff was lined up. In the back, Leora saw a new manager trembling slightly. Giselle was long gone. Rumor had it she was working a diner in Ohio, terrified to step foot in Illinois. They walked to the VIP section, the same table where he had collapsed. Dante didn't sit. He stood by the velvet rope, waiting until the entire room was watching. He pulled Leora close, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. He picked up a glass of champagne and raised his voice, silencing the few whispers remaining. 6 months ago, Dante announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room. A woman was fired in this room. The guests exchanged nervous glances. She was fired for breaking a rule, Dante continued, his eyes locking onto Leora's. The rule was, do not touch the Callaways. He took a step closer to her, invading her space, the heat radiating off him. Tonight, I am setting a new rule for this city. He leaned down, brushing his lips against her ear, but speaking loud enough for the front tables to hear. No one touches her but me. He kissed her. It wasn't a polite society kiss. It was deep claiming and fierce. When they broke apart, Leora looked at the stunned room. She saw the fear, the respect, and the awe. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She wasn't the nurse. She was the one holding the leash of the most dangerous man in Chicago. She picked up a glass of wine, looked at the trembling new manager, and smiled. Table 4 needs a refill, Leora said coolly. Chop chop. And that is how Leora Mercer went from serving the wine to owning the cellar. It's a terrifying reminder that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of your new one. Leora was fired for a simple act of kindness, for seeing a human being where everyone else saw a monster. She didn't know that catch would cost her a job, but gain her an empire. In the world of the Callaways, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Leora didn't have money connections or weapons. She just had the guts to stay when everyone else ran. She proved that even in a city ruled by wolves, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is the one person the wolf trusts. I want to know what you would have done in Leora's shoes when Salvatore offered her that check for $100,000 to leave and never come back. Be honest. Would you have taken the money and run? Or would you have ripped it up to stay with the dangerous Dante Calloway? Let me know your choice in the comments below. Team Money or Team Dante? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss next week's story, which involves a billionaire, a fake marriage, and a very real betrayal. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.